Great, thanks, Alan. Good to be with you today. Certainly good to be in the recruitment industry in the 21st century. Something that Alan and I were talking about just a few minutes ago was the death of the recruitment industry, which some of you may remember was heralded in the late 1990s with the advent of the job boards, when we were going to be disintermediated. And of course that didn't happen. And neither is it going to happen with social media, because one of the things that people forget about who are outside of the industry is the fact that we add significant value. Obviously it varies from time to time on how much value we do add and who you're dealing with. Of course it does. It does in all companies. But we are not just agents in the process. And that's why we will not be disintermediated. You know, that's what they said about Monster, that we'd be just taken out the process. So I stand here before you today to talk about developing markets, but also to bear in mind, I think, this fact that we're as relevant today as we were when I first started out in the business 20-odd years ago. You know, I started that as a teenager, obviously. And as relevant as when I set up Antal 20 years ago this April. So let's talk about that journey then, because it has been quite remarkable. And during that, it will become evident how we scaled the business, how we increased shareholder value, and how we developed an internationally recognised brand, which, you know, particularly in developing markets, was quite remarkable. You know, people say to me, Tony, well, what was so remarkable about the deal that you did in Russia? You know, lots of people have built recruitment businesses and sold them or transacted them or floated them and done a lot better than Antal did. And that's true. But the difference is that we did it in an economy which people, before we went there, didn't even know existed in recruitment terms. You know, I remember back in 1993 on a plane, taxiing down the runway on my way to Moscow, on my way to Russia. And as the plane was kind of going down the runway, I remember thinking to myself, you know, the old KGB, which is now the FSB, they really do look upon people who speak their mind and have an opinion and like to tell people their opinion not very well in that kind of country. And I thought to myself at the time, do you know what, that's what recruitment consultancy is all about. And maybe I shouldn't have a drink when I go out there. Maybe I shouldn't be quite as opinionated as I am in the UK. Anyway, as the plane was taking off, all these thoughts were going through my mind. I thought, crikey, I haven't even told my mum where I'm going. And there I was on my way to one of the most hostile, potentially hostile environments that you've ever seen. So, you know, it wasn't straightforward. The other thing that's remarkable about the deal that we did is that we did it in an environment which is really a heavy industry, energy, commodities, oil and gas related industry. And what we did, we built a service business where, you know, the main assets, as you all know, walk out of the door every day, go up and down in the lift and walk out the door every day. And we did it where a blue chip fund turned it upside down and inside out and didn't find anything wrong with the deal. So how did we do that? Well, first of all, there does need to be a plan, and there always was a plan. You know, even when I was sitting in Putney Bridge on my own in an office not much bigger than this podium times two, with a telephone, a computer that I could barely switch on, and a fax machine. Remember faxes? So it was one man and no dog. And even then, I had these ideas about building the kind of business that we have today. So much so that I couldn't really talk to my friends about it, because I remember mentioning when it was just me back in 1993 in a pub with a couple of mates about, you know, I want to open offices all around Central and Eastern Europe, and then I want to float the company, and then we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And the expression on their face, you know, so much so they even spat their beer back into their glasses and said, Tony, you're on your own. So how much have you been drinking? What have you been smoking? And so in the end, I just kept it to myself. But I did have a plan, and I know that many of us in this room, we run our businesses intuitively. We run our businesses instinctively, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you've been to as many developing markets as I have, I went yesterday to get visas for India, and the Indian consulate or the High Commission have just doubled the price of their visas. So you do not need an MBA or econometrics degree to understand how to make money, and they certainly don't need that in these developing markets. But you do need a plan, and and there's nothing wrong with running your businesses intuitively, instinctively, and that's certainly how people make money in the developing markets, intuitively and instinctively. But it is right to know a lot about your competition, the market demographics, what's going on, where and when within those marketplaces. And that's what I set out to do right from the beginning. And then a friend of mine said to me, Tony, you don't speak Russian, you don't speak Czech, you don't speak Hungarian or Polish or Serbian or Croat. How on earth are you going to write your first financial controllership management position to be placed in the Financial Times as we used to at the time, because I was a finance recruiter for Harrison Willis prior to setting up Antal. How are you going to do that? And I said, well, I think that the language of business in Central and Eastern Europe at the time will be English. And at that time, actually, it was a struggle there was a fight almost going on between German and French as to be what would be the most dominant language. And so, luckily for us, the influence of the Americans and the IT language in particular, it was English that became the dominant language. So I was lucky in that respect. And you need to ride your luck. You need to understand that luck does play its part in all of this. But let's look now then at that business model, at that Russian information memorandum, which we put together in 2007. And I don't think you can see these figures, unfortunately, but what it shows there is that the GDP went from 306 billion to a forecast at the time in 2010 of 1.6 trillion. And that's the way that I think that actually was an underestimate of where the market went. And foreign direct investment, which is indicated below there, went up from 2.7 trillion to 11.8 trillion. So clearly we were in a market that was expanding, and that always helps. I wouldn't say it's a prerequisite, because you can, as many of you do, even in a competitive market in the UK and Europe, find niches to exploit. But we were clearly in a market that was going places, albeit that most people at the time, apart from a company called Nicholson International, didn't understand and didn't want to try to exploit. But one of my reasons for going there was for exactly that nobody else was interested. Nobody else wanted to know, and therefore I had very little competition. Even today, actually, in the Moscow marketplace, the Russian marketplace, they have relatively small numbers of competitors compared to, say, London or Frankfurt, Paris, Munich, and the like, Berlin. So, what were we selling? Again, we had to be quite clear on this. Otherwise, we're just a good bunch of chaps with a lot of energy and enthusiasm and a good idea about what we were doing, but that's it. You need to have a methodology. You need to have a way of doing things, and that's what we had. We put together, Graham Reed, the group managing director, and I, we put together with Tremaine Elson, who was running our Russian entity then, the actual Antal format of operation. A lot of people used one of these techniques, Very few people at the time were using them all together. Again, not rocket science, but formalising and structuring the process, because investors, third-party investors, we're talking about creating shareholder value here. Third-party investors want to see structure, process, methodology, and that's very important, because sometimes as recruiters, particularly entrepreneurial recruiters, we just seem to, whatever works, however we get results, that justifies the process and the structure. Well, you've got to have process and structure. So much so that then I saw we were losing out business to people who were more specialised than we were in certain areas. So I came up with this idea of this matrix. And again, not the most learned or erudite thing you'll ever see, but it's actually simplistically very, very straightforward. But most people don't get it. I mean, I even see Michael Page consultants now, today, working in sectors rather than disciplines, or disciplines that aren't related to the sectors that they know about. So actually, even although this looks very, very simple, it's discipline across the horizontal axis and sector down the vertical axis. A lot of people just don't get it. They just don't get it. And I think that when we were selling the transaction to our private equity investors, it was really important that we understood and we knew where we were taking this and where we were going with it. So I think that what you will see from the little that I've been able to show, there's certain things that are still confidential, even 5 years on from the process, but it does give you a sense of the structure, the direction and purpose that we were taking the business in, which is what shareholders want to see. Investors are very cautious people, as I was going on to say, and they always feel that entrepreneurs are doing a transaction or cashing out because it's the top of the market, or that there's something that's going to go wrong with the business. So they need to see structure, direction and purpose in what you're doing, so that there is a consistency and a continuity of revenue streams, which with an in-depth business model gives them some upside. And what we're really proud of with the Russian transaction is that even today, the business is trading at 50% higher than it was when we did the deal. Even though we did the deal pre-Lehman Brothers collapse and the financial crisis of 2008, or when it really took off. I know it started with Bear Stearns in July 2007, but actually it didn't really take a grip of the world economy until Lehman's collapse in 2008. So we sold the business prior to that event. So naturally the business went down by 50%, and it came back by over 50% now it's trading at, with something like 40% more staff than it had when we did the transaction. That gives us enormous clout or credibility and kudos within the capital markets. You can go into the capital markets and fool them once, and that will be the last time you do that. Or you can go into the capital markets and do what John Hunt did at Foxtons once, and they won't back you again. And what we're particularly proud of is that management team is still in place, albeit Tremaine, who was really more of a non-exec at the time anyway, is now back with us. But the management team with Michael Germeshausen, Luke Jones, Natasha Kirkchi, and the like are all still there, performing very, very well. And it's one of the best performing businesses within the 510 group. And so, John Rose, who's the chief executive of 510, said, we're very, very pleased with the acquisition that we made from Antal International. The other smart thing about that, which, I'd like to think was pre-planned, but it wasn't completely pre-planned, although that's what we had in mind, was the separation of the Russia business as an entity in its own right to be sold with the same trading name. In 2005, we were told that won't happen, Tony. You can't do that. No one's going to want to transact or buy part or all of a business which still is trading as the same name in other parts of the world. Clearly, the people who advised us that now weren't advising us on the deal when we did the transaction. But we did it, and consequently grew the rest of the businesses in line with that one once the deal had been done. So we're really pleased with that. And again, you know, the business model, the MPM, the rising star, the quality volume. There are more ways of doing recruitment than there are people in this room. And what's important for us is that the people working for us did it our way. They could do it the Michael Page way, or the Robert Walters way, or the hydrogen way, or the S3 way when they're working with those companies. If they were to come across to us, then they will do it our way, because otherwise you lose value. You just have a great bunch of people doing a good job, and it isn't a business that you can certainly create value from. Again, sorry about this clarity here, but what we're detailing here now is the key personnel and the tenure of those personnel, of those people at the time. Remember, this was 5 or 6 years. 6 years ago, we actually prepared this information memorandum. And by the way, it's not often you see these kinds of things, that people are able to put them on show for public display. But we've got 11 years for the Group Managing Director, Graham. He's now been with us. He's now in his 17th year. Paul Russell was 7 years at the time, actually been with the business on and off for 15 years. The Managing Director at the time, 13 years, who had a 6-month break. The Senior Partner, or the Deputy Managing Director, 9 years. Another Senior Partner, 5 years, who's now been with us 10 years. And so it goes on, 5 years, 4 years, 6 years. This is really important in our business, and it's particularly important in developing markets. You know, the people are worried. Investors, again, a timid bunch, think you're going to run off with their money, and they are worried that you are going to do exactly that, and they want to see tenure, they want to see longevity and loyalty and commitment, because they want those people to keep coming back after they've taken a stake in the business or you've transacted the business. So, you know, not to be underestimated, that page in the information memorandum. This is detailing our client revenues. What it shows there in the top 20 clients, not one of those clients was over 3% of our total revenue. So we weren't dependent upon a particular client that would then, if they disappeared, would jeopardize the business. You know, that's not necessarily the case in RPO companies, where they have 2 or 3 major clients that if they don't, for one reason or another, want to maintain their relationship, that business is in trouble. That wasn't the case with us. Likewise with the age debtor analysis. Here we're defining it by our revenues by industry sector. Quite interesting, because by industry sector and by discipline is that I set out as an accountancy recruiter. You know, Michael Page were my nemesis, and to a lesser extent still are. You know, I still like to beat them. Interestingly, you know, you can see here that sales and marketing became our largest discipline in the Russian marketplace after I moved away from the business. And that's another important thing in terms of growing the business, is allowing the management of that business to do it our way, but with their particular emphasis and knowledge and experience, and using their skill base to make it work for them. And so, consequently, I didn't say, well, you've got to be an accountancy recruiter. The mainstay of our business has got to be accountancy recruitment. I let it evolve to fit that marketplace. Also, what might not be clear there is on the oil and gas side of things was only 6% of our revenue. Natural resources, only 6% of our revenue, which, you know, the Russian economy is really an oil and gas economy. The reason they haven't gone into recession and have still been growing at 4% plus over the last 2 or 3 years is because of the oil price. So to see a service business not dependent upon like the Americans say that they are addicted to petroleum, and we've got an agency, a recruitment professional services organisation here, which is not really focused or dependent upon natural resources, was also quite a plus to the investors. They were quite surprised to see that, and it actually added all of these things added to the stability of the shareholder value and the price that we were able to extract for it, because we were a premium product in a commoditized marketplace. And that again, hopefully comes across from what you've seen now. I know, if you could see it better, it would probably come across better. But, we were showing potential investors that we weren't just average, and that we were doing something particularly well in a difficult marketplace. And we were exacting really quite onerous responsibilities and tasks upon our management, and making sure that they did it properly, even though it's a developing market. One of the myths of developing markets that I soon found out in 93, 94 was that you can't take a second-rate product, say, in the UK, like horse meat perhaps, and sell it in a developing market, because that doesn't matter for them, because, they won't mind, they never had anything anyway before, so let's just give them our second-rate products. They will not accept it. That is something I learned very early on, and they wanted the best. And so we, consequently, delivered the best in terms of the solutions that in recruitment terms. So it's best practice, always best practice. Even in China today, one of our Chinese senior partners said, if we didn't have at least a smattering of Western managers here, we wouldn't think that we were learning from you. So it's important that people see there is a skills transference, that they're getting the best, the state of the art, the way that things should be done at the forefront of what's going on in recruitment. And certainly that's what we tried to deliver. Again, key performance indicators, metrics, run professionally. You can't see them all up here, but we're talking about the number of CVs out, the number of client meetings, the number of face-to-face interviews, the way that we controlled the management of the company by talking to them on a twice daily basis all around the world. I mean, this doesn't apply just to Russia. I'm using Russia as an example because we have done a transaction with that business for many tens of millions, and therefore, to me, that's better than any MBA you'll ever do. When an outside, independent third party is willing to pay you that kind of money for your business, you don't need a business school to tell you that you've got a good business, or you don't need a qualification to tell you you've got a great business. And so what we were saying here is that all of this was backed up by thorough professional daily management. And then to really consolidate on what I've said about developing the international brand is to carry on doing what is a good job repeatedly, and then do it again. But then tell people about it. That's what we became quite good at, particularly within the Russian market at the time, because we created the whole advertising market for recruitment jobs. Some of you may be old enough to remember that there used to be a lot of recruitment press advertising before the job boards, which, by the way, that's who they did disintermediate, not us. As Robbie Cowling said to me at the Fast Track Richard Branson presentation 12 years ago. That's who they wanted to disintermediate, was the press advertising. But you could build a brand just like Page and Walters did in the Financial Times on client-paid advertising, and that's what we did very well. But the other thing about this is that none of us here in this room are consumer brands. So don't get waylaid by trying to spend your money, your hard-earned client account money as well, on advertising like you would for a consumer brand, because we're not consumer brands. So our way of doing it was to interact with the client on surveys and pinpoint PR articles and thought leadership articles and opinion. You know, we're all really good at this in this industry of having an opinion. Well, get that out there then and talk to people on a regular basis. And that's what we found worked particularly well. I remember CNN back in 1998. CNN did a whole program on Antal International with a journalist called Riz Khan. It was Riz Khan's Q&A. And I tell you now, there was nothing more grueling and anxiety-ridden than doing live television on CNN for half an hour. But I remember at the time, it was just after the Russian crisis when most Russian firms had stopped hiring. And we got 3 clients from that CNN interview and program. So the PR, as Branson always says, you know, PR does work. And we found it, if it's targeted, particularly relevant to our industry, it does. And that's true too of all the social networking. You know, I think it's great that all of this is coming up live now, and that we can talk about this and as it's happening. And I think that can only assist you in building your businesses. These were the awards we got. This was, you know, 5, 6 years ago. So look at the awards that we were getting. We were getting the recognition at the time, and it's, you know, people say, so what? You know, I'd much rather have a big client account than I would an award, which is absolutely true. You know, these awards they're not profit, they're not placements, they're not satisfied clients. But to get third parties approval ratings for a service, business service, you know, we don't have an iPhone, an iPad, a BlackBerry, or a Samsung Galaxy. We don't have a product which is, you know, you can feel, you can touch, you can use. It's a service business. So it is actually important to us to have that outside recognition. So we can say to our clients, we don't just think we are quite good at what we are doing, but so does somebody else as well. And, you know, that's actually quite important to us. And this was just some of the advertising when we were able to run client-paid advertising back in the 90s and an early part of the noughties. This is what the advertising looked like for us. And, you know, it brings it back onto today, really, with the direct marketing tools that we have. You know, what has been phenomenally successful for us in terms of developing the internationally recognised brand is the Antal Global Snapshot, which is an employment survey that we do on a quarterly basis, make sure that we do it every quarter consistently. And I think the last respondent we had to that was 17,000. And it works, you know, this is the kind of information that clients want, that are even being used by other competitors because it is interesting and relevant. But what was particularly interesting about this is that after the CNN survey we did back in 1998, we weren't able to get this moving, to get this working until 10 years later with Blue Sky and Adrian Bauer, who said, you know what, Tony, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what you want for this. And that's worked incredibly well for us. And that can work on the whole online and media space, social media space as well. And there's a few copies here if anybody wants one. You know, we're quite happy for you to use it and quote it. But, you know, I just underline there at the bottom that we're not a consumer brand. So let's not try and become a consumer brand and try and do it in that way. What I would say in conclusion is that you know, the social media and social networking is a fascinating and ever-changing area. But as Warren Buffett, the world's second richest man and probably the world's greatest investor, said, there's no such thing as new sex. Social media is not going to take over the job of the recruitment consultant. If anything, we will just come up with more ingenious ways of using it to our benefit. So on that point, thank you very much, everybody.